Today we are going to discuss one of the questions I get asked most about investing. Should I put my money in a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA? Welcome, I'm Ed Smith from Valor Wealth Partners. We are dedicated to educating federal employees on how to maximize value from their government benefits by developing and executing a financial plan. Let's get right into the differences between a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA. It really comes down to contributions and withdrawals. On the contribution side, the money that you put into a traditional IRA is before tax, which means that if you have $1,000, all $1,000 goes into that traditional IRA. On the other hand, a Roth IRA gets taxed before it goes into that account, which means, again, on that $1,000, in a 25% tax bracket, you would lose $250 and you would only have $750 to start in that account. On the other side is the withdrawals. The traditional IRA is 100% taxed on both the principal you put in and the gain through all of those years. On the Roth IRA, you have no tax on both the principal and the gain, which means while you might have only started with $750, because you don't have to pay taxes on that gain, you actually might make out pretty good. So there's three factors that I look at when I'm trying to decide if a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA is best for a client. The first one is time. If you have a lot of time on your side, a Roth IRA might be the best option for you. Because you have that ability to grow tax-free and compound the interest over years, this could be very beneficial for you. The second is the asset allocation, or what are your investments in? On a traditional IRA, if your investments are at a lower returning investment like a bond, that's actually going to be better for you based off of the taxes that you're putting it in. On a Roth IRA, you want a high growth or aggressive investments like stocks. Because you're not paying the taxes on the growth, you want more growth in the Roth versus in the traditional, because you are going to have to pay taxes there eventually. One of the things you have to look at is your risk allocation matches your investments. Just because you're trying to maximize the benefit from a traditional or a Roth IRA doesn't mean that the amount of money you have in is what you should have for investments. If you're supposed to be at a 50% stock and 50% bonds, and 75% of your money is in a traditional IRA, then you probably would have a little bit more of stocks in your traditional IRA, and then you can have the remaining 25% all in your Roth IRA. That's how you can maximize it on the allocation side, because you want to get that higher returning money in the Roth because you don't have to pay those taxes. The last area is the taxes. So what you have to look at is what are the taxes, or what tax bracket you're in when you're younger, when you put the money in, and what is the tax bracket you plan to be on when you take the money out. If you're in a very high tax bracket when you're younger, then maybe a traditional IRA is better because you're going to get the tax benefit early on. If you're going to be in a very high tax bracket when you're older or when you take the money out, the Roth IRA might be better. So a young person that's just starting off in their career, if they have the money to put into a Roth IRA, it might be advantageous to put more money into that Roth because they have time on their side, they can manipulate the allocation, and they're not losing too much on the taxes. Down the road, hopefully, they're in a higher tax bracket because they've earned a lot of money and they've done well in their career. The problem with looking at what your tax bracket is going to be when you take your money out is we have no idea. The government changes the tax code frequently, and we don't know if in 10, 15, 40 years what the tax code is going to be, and if your marginal bracket is going to be higher or lower than what it is today. So you have to use a couple of assumptions to be able to do that. Sometimes you might win, sometimes you might lose. When you look specifically at the TSP, you do not have the ability to change the allocation because your traditional IRA and your Roth IRA assets are exactly the same and you cannot do a different allocation for each one, you have to be looking at how do you maximize the Roth and the TSP. There's a couple of ways you can do this. One, while you're still working, you build up that Roth IRA. Even though you might be losing a little bit on taxes in the beginning, you know that once you are eligible, you're going to do a rollover, and then you can split the traditional IRA to be a little bit more conservative and the Roth IRA to be more aggressive. So you're planning for the point that when you are no longer in federal service, and you're able to move that out and separate it at that point. Another option is to maximize the traditional component of your TSP. You're getting the tax benefits while you're still working, and once you retire, you hopefully will be in a lower tax bracket, and you can start doing Roth conversions and move that money over into a Roth at that point. So you're not paying as high of a tax bracket as you were while you were still working. This allows you to be able to split those assets and have different allocations, and hopefully have a long time you're able to have growth on those assets. The third option is to actually invest some money outside of your TSP into the Roth. If you're a high income earner, you might be over the eligibility limits. So an option you have here is to make an after-tax contribution to a traditional IRA. So it's not deducting that, you still have to pay taxes on that money. But then you can do a rollover or convert that money over to a Roth IRA relatively soon, and then you're going to get the long-term benefits of the Roth IRA. So those three options should be able to help you when you're planning on putting money into the Roth IRA if you're using the TSP. I hope these TSP tips have been helpful for you today, and we look forward to bringing more of them to you in the future. Thank you.